Hello, Red Nail Energy listeners. This is Mikhail, and I am in studio today with a dear friend, and I would honestly say family member who we already said this is going to be a rough one, but for the best reasons. I've got September here with me. She is like a big sister, and she is the heart behind Connection is the Cure. Connection is the Cure is a movement dedicated to linking individuals to vital mental health resources and fostering genuine human connections. Through community events, heartfelt conversations, and advocacy, she champions the belief that no one should navigate their struggles alone. September's mission is clear: to create spaces where people feel seen, heard, and supported. So, welcome, September.
Thank you for having me. This
Yes.
is so awesome.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming. I think probably both of us were like, we have to just gear up for this conversation because it is just so special and meaningful to both of us. But I also know that the hardest conversations are the ones that are the most important to have. So I know that a lot of listeners will gain a lot from this, and the whole world, I think, could just take from not only your story and your sharing, but especially from Robert and getting to kind of keep his legacy alive and talk about him. So I would love to kind of start with that, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about how Connection is the Cure came to be. And, we can talk a little bit about Robert too.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yes, I'm sure this is going to be emotional, but I think, those hard conversations are the best ones. And I feel like no matter how many times I talk about this, no matter how many times I share it, it pulls on my heart in a different way each time, but it pulls on my heart every time. So, and it's always hard to know like really where to start with Robert because he was just so dynamic and had so much, so many layers to him. And so I grew up in Boise, you know all this, like went to high school here. And Robert was my younger brother. And then I have another younger brother under him. And Robert was just always like so full of energy. And he was just loud and like just so much in the best way. And he was good at everything he did. He excelled at things. He was introspective, at such a young age. And I think with that, he just carried a lot. And that continued to be the pattern as he went into adulthood. And I know at a certain time in his life, young adult life, like that 19 to 21 age, he served a mission in Ecuador. And I think that was like a really pivotal point for him because I think that was one of the first times he really felt peace, where he'd kind of just gotten out from under a lot of the stuff that he was surrounded by and was able to just be with the people and provide service and love and simplified things. And but following that, life ramped up and he got married and had kids and was going to school. And I think that with each one of those things, just the weight of the world became heavier and heavier. And he was such a deep thinker. And he just had always really struggled with his mental health. And I think my parents at the time had, when he was a kid, I remember him going and talking with a counselor and seeing a psychiatrist and, doing some of that. But it was still such a foreign place to navigate, I think, especially with children, And so I don't think he'd ever found something that he felt a lot of relief in. And he ended up going to nursing school, which he was such a caretaker. But with that came a lot more weight, like a heavy weight. He worked in the PICU, like with kids that were in intensive care, and seeing children passing from neglect and just different things, I think was really hard for him to process. And on top of everything else that was going on in his life, I think he just got to a breaking point where it was like he couldn't carry it anymore. And I think that is something really hard for people to understand if they haven't been there, why someone would turn to substances for relief, And I think I had those same questions, but now as I've like watched him and spoke with other people that have had just really hard life experiences, like we all do in some way, I think you get to a point where you're just like, you do something to feel relief. And Robert did turn to substances at that point. And just like everything else that he did in his life, like so well and to an extreme, his drug use was no different. And once he kind of started down that path and that momentum got building, he got in really deep. And at one point, everything kind of came out, and he came back to Idaho. And I was like, okay, naively, if we can get him back here and we can love on him and help him remember who he is, get him the help that he needs, we can fix him. We can save him, you know? And he was here for 2 years and, you know, in and out of sobriety, in and out of rehab, family programs, overdoses. I think I just walked beside him along with my other brother and my parents on that path and got a front row seat to the chaos that occurs when that door's kicked open like that. And I remember walking into the grocery store one day after being in the hospital with him most of the night on an overdose and seeing the way that he was treated and looked at as an addict. And I remember looking around being like, I'm at the grocery store trying to do this simple task and I'm carrying this thing on my heart and mind. And then my next thought was looking around and wondering how many other people were carrying something heavy like this with them. And my eyes really started to be opened to the fact that you hear like everyone's going through something, everyone's fighting a silent battle that we don't know about. Like that always sounded nice, but like in that instant, I think it became a reality. And also having that realization that as this path continued, that some of our worst nightmares were like just around the corner, you know, losing him ending up in prison. You know, I mean, there were so many different like thoughts and then that feeling of being completely out of control, just like drowning, not knowing where to turn for help, like knowing that because I grew up here, this is an amazing place and there had to be resources and help out there, but I couldn't reach out. Like my parents couldn't reach out. You know, there was too much happening. And so that helplessness and hopelessness that starts to settle in, and still that naive part of you that's thinking, I'm strong enough to save him. Like I can be strong enough for both of us and this is going to turn out okay. Not realizing how much or how little control I had over the situation and how much control was on his part, and he had to be like an active participant. And I know that Robert wanted that. I know that he fought for that. But there hit a point where his drug use had become so extreme that he had like a psychotic break. And at that point, he realized that he needed to get sober and went to rehab again and had about 9 months of sobriety. And during that time, he was experiencing like schizophrenic symptoms, even with, you know, the damage and the overdoses and all that stuff had been done to his brain. Not that he couldn't have healed, but he wasn't making progress like he had hoped. And I think he came from such a high functioning level, being able to wear that mask even when he was down, to just this super low place. And when that happened, I think things took a turn where he became very hopeless. You know, I think he always, even as a kid, got a kick out of like digging himself in a hole and then seeing if he could still climb out. And I think this was the first time in his life where he realized, like, I'm not going to be able to climb out of this one, you know? And so we had another really big incident where he relapsed, and he was arrested for the first time, and just some things had happened that he just felt like he could not come back from. And he rallied for 6 weeks. And then on Mother's Day, May 9th of 2021, we sat down to dinner, and I had seen him earlier that day. And he actually seemed pretty at peace, and like he'd felt a sense of relief, you know. And he was telling us some really funny stories about junior high, and he was making my kids laugh. And I remember he could only handle little short social interactions before he was like over his capacity. And whenever he would leave, I would always ask him to come back. Like, I wanted more of him in those moments where he was himself. And I just remember him saying, like, I'm going to go up and shower, and him walking up, getting ready to walk up the stairs, and just almost like muscle memory, I almost said, wait, don't go yet. Like, come back and hang out until we leave, you know? And I didn't. Like, I stopped myself because in so many ways I knew that that just added to his guilt. And I'm actually really thankful that day that I didn't do that to him. But he went upstairs, and we left, and a handful of hours later, we were at our house sitting down for dinner. My parents were there, and my husband received a text from him that just said that he hoped that he would be able to find peace in death, and he told us where we would be able to find him, you know. And I just, as much as you prepare for that moment, like, you know, it's never enough. It'll never be enough. But I went into like taking care of mode, and just calling him, calling the sheriff's department in the area that he said he'd be in, like, and about 2 hours later, the Meridian Police Department showed up at our door. And I remember just having the thought, like, here we go, you know. And it was devastating. And I can say this now without guilt, but it was also, as time started to go on a little bit, it was also a huge relief. And I remember feeling so guilty about thinking that. But I remember that night going to sleep, and all 5 of my kids were on my floor. Like, no one wanted to be away from the other one. And I remember saying a prayer in my head, like, how? Why? What do we do now? And I just remember having this thought process that was like, I've got him. Like, you go. You've got work to do. And as that started to progress, I really feel like to the extent that Robert suffered for so many years, I feel like he could have left this earth a lot sooner than he did. And he did have prior suicide attempts that were, you know, didn't go through, and all of that. And I really do think that the last few years that he was in Idaho, back in Idaho with us, it wasn't for me to save him. It was for him to save me. Everything that I learned walking next to him has blown my world apart, but it has literally saved me at the same time. So I think that not only for me, but for me to be able to successfully help other people through Connection is the Cure, all of that had to happen, because that's the only way we learn empathy, you know, on that level. So it's a lot, and it still continues to be a lot, but it's literally one step, one foot in front of the other. Yeah. You know,
it's really all you can do. And I appreciate you so much for sharing that. I think that the more we can talk about people that we've lost, and most importantly, talk about the reality of the situation. I think, you know, when my dad died, there was a little bit of a time where I was like, he was the world's greatest dad. And objectively, he wasn't the world's greatest dad. Like, your brain sometimes goes to protecting them. But I think that the more honest we can be, it allows ourselves to grieve who they were. And then, like you said, give ourselves permission to feel relief that they are not suffering. And also, we don't have to go to bed every single night wondering when we're going to get that phone call. The real estate that takes up in your brain when you have someone you love that has a form of mental illness or addiction is massive. And I think it's really important for listeners to hear that, because it does feel so wrong to acknowledge. But I'd love for you to speak to that point a little bit more, of just what the next, you know, few days, which turned into months and then years, kind of looked like in your healing, but also maybe how some of the relief found you in ways of like little reminders that he's there, little abilities to just know that your work is not done and his work is still working through you, through your family, through everyone that knew him, which is so beautiful.
Yeah. Yes. I think I've always had like a desire to be part of something like I have a deep desire to help and to serve and to, you know, be there for other people. I feel like I've spent my entire life creating connection and building connection and investing in the people that I love and even people that I don't know. I just have like a huge love for people, you know, and I think that this really opened that even more so. I think after, it was almost like training ground. Like my whole life has been a training ground for this, and not just to help other people, but like my own children and
myself.
Yes, myself. Yeah. Like that, like is such a huge part of it, which has been probably the craziest part, because it's like the part that I didn't think that it was going to like unlock. But so that summer following his passing, I had become pretty close with the people. He was going to a recovery center called Brickhouse Recovery in town, and they have multiple locations all over the state of Idaho. And I remember getting to know some of the people there a little bit more after his passing. And his recovery coach, probably 2 months before he passed away, or a month or so before he passed away, had him sign an ROI for me because of some stuff that had happened. And he couldn't talk to me, and it was like killing him. And, you know, he's like, Robert came in the next time. He's like, you got to sign this. I can't do that again, you know? So I got to go in and speak with them and speak with Robert's counselor and his recovery coach. And I got to have so much insight into like the things that he didn't share with us and show us. And, you know, and that was so healing. And I think that it just solidified that feeling of like, it's okay to feel like relief too, because it showed us to the extent of the suffering. And it also just opened my eyes to so much. Just, you know, most all of the people that work there are in recovery. And I just wanted to know like their stories. And I wanted to know like where their turning point was. And I got super familiar with that, like saying of like rock bottom, but like, I don't like that, because I feel like for Robert, he would just get a shovel and keep digging, you know? And there's a word, and I'm probably not going to say it right, but it's litos, and it's in, oh my gosh, I can't remember the language that it's in, but anyways, they use that word to recognize the moment you become aware of your own suffering. Like there's a moment that you hit that, what other people refer to as rock bottom. And that has stuck with me, because I'm like, it really is like a feeling and a turning point. So as I'm talking to each one of these people, and they're introducing me to other people, and I'm getting permission to sit in these circles and groups and share and hear, I'm realizing that at everyone's turning point where maybe they went right instead of left, it was a point of connection. Like that they found to themselves, that they found to someone near them, you know, or to a higher power, Like it was always a connection. And so then that I was reflecting on Robert's path, and I'm like, I remember kind of a distinct point where there became a disconnect, and it just got me thinking so much about that concept of connection being the cure. And at that same time, I was learning about all of our local resources, like looking things up, like going and visiting places, like finding places that like I could have taken Robert in the middle of the night after the hospital released him, and just different things. And then with that also, I was like, I have to understand like why people die by suicide, like why people become addicted to substances, like it's not a character defect, like it's something that they're doing to mask the pain and fill the void. And so I started just gaining all this education around that. I started taking trainings, and we started putting together these care packs and delivering them to these places where, people end up after the hospital or after an attempt on their life. And it just threw me into a whole nother world. And I think that's really when Connection is the Cure got going unofficially, And then in August that year, Robert's best friend, Brett, messaged me and was like, hey, there's this like artist, this musician on Instagram. And I saw that he's doing these suicide prevention concerts. Like he's in Utah. You should reach out to him and see if he'll come to Idaho. So I did. And he was like, yeah, sure. Like I'll get you in touch with my manager and we'll, see what we can do. And so music was like such a part of Robert's life. I feel like especially, he was self-taught on the guitar and singing, and we're not a musical family. And so that was such a huge, that multiple times in his life, I think saved him in different ways. And I also like just the concept of music, like towards the end when he didn't have words left to communicate, like he would send a song and I would listen to the lyrics and I could kind of just like relate to like what he was feeling, And I think music is the great connector. Like we can disagree with someone on almost everything and have like an artist in common that we're like, oh, like you like them? Like I get it. Or like being able to hear the lyrics to a song and be like, that's exactly how I felt. I didn't know how to say it though, And so music ended up being like a driving force of these events that we wanted to start doing. And so from August till January of 2022, or September, I guess, to January, we pulled the community together and planned this event. And we had the concert portion, we had speakers with lived experience, and then we also had gathered resource booths, community partners that would come and share, set up a booth and in the concourses and share their information so people could have it, before it was too late or before they were in a situation where they couldn't reach out, And a concept of connecting people to people and people to resources came about. And I knew that we lived in an awesome place, but I had no idea. And that first event was coming off the heels of COVID, where people were starved for connection. And we were able to, in that 4 or 5 month period, not ever having done it before, like every time we needed something, the right person would just show up or we'd get connected with the right person. And we pulled off this event at the Fort Idaho Center, where we had almost 10,000 people show up. And I still get messages, in the last 4 years, I still get messages from people that were like, that event saved my life. This was a huge turning point. The musician had a moment where he asked if they felt comfortable, like survivors of suicide, to come up on stage and just take a moment, And I remember some other teenagers later talking with them and being like, that kid's in my math class or that kid's in my English class. I had no idea that they were like struggling. Like it was so eye-opening, I think, for both kids and parents and just everyone involved. And through that event, I think we were able to provide hope for the future, but also provide some amount of education. Because I think that when it comes to suicide and even addiction and drugs, as parents, we feel like if we talk about these things, it's going to plant the idea in our kids' heads and let them know that it's an option. And everything that they know about suicide says the opposite. The more direct you can be in those conversations, the more open you can be, like these people that are feeling that way are carrying this immense weight. Like we as humans are built to survive. Like you hear about people that are in the wilderness for days at a time and they're, like cutting off their own arm because it's stuck, because that will to survive is so strong. And when you're sitting with someone that has given up that survival because they are in a place where there's no hope, it is something that I don't know if I can like articulate it, like, but the feeling that is there, like, it is such a heaviness. And for someone in that moment to come in and directly ask them, like, are you thinking about killing yourself? Like, I'm feeling this from you by what you're saying, by what, it is like letting them know that you care enough to ask and that you don't have all the answers, but you're going to figure it out together. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, that person will tell you the truth, and then you can move forward from there. But I didn't understand that concept. Like, it's not intuitive to talk about those things, especially as parents to our children, And I just think that message was spread in that moment, like it started this, and since then I think we've taken like leaps and bounds with discussion about mental health and awareness. And, there's so many amazing things that have happened in the last handful of years, like progress. But for me, that really like kicked it off. And we kind of thought with Connection is the Cure, it would just be this one event. And then when we had that turnout and the stories that were flooding in afterwards, it was like, oh man, we got to keep going, Mm-hmm. So that's what we've done. Yeah. And it's evolved and morphed. And, I think often that like, I do believe that like Robert and I had some kind of spiritual contract mm-hmm. before this life, mm-hmm. and that we're both doing our part. Like I feel like I'm pushing and he's pulling mm-hmm. in a way that is it's bringing people closer to peace, and support mm-hmm. and love.
Yeah. I had someone, I was speaking about a difficult relationship that was in my life, and I had somebody reflect back to me, what if that person accepted a soul contract to come to this earth and their entire purpose within your relationship was like to teach you patience and empathy and all these things that feel like they're being challenged? And I didn't really want to accept that as an option, but it was like, oh my gosh. And then he said, and what an amazing person to accept that soul contract, to be willing to come here and have the world look at them differently, have people, stare at them or question things or talk about them or whisper when they see maybe they look like an addict or whatever it may be. And that person was at, and whatever your belief system is, we don't need to talk about reincarnation, multiple lives, whatever. It's the concept of that it's like, maybe that person was willing to be that so that so many other people could live out their purposes. And it sounds like your kind of acceptance and deeper understanding of that is able to bring you so much peace too, about viewing your relationship with him so positively and with so much love and peace surrounding something that many times was not peaceful. And my question, with that being said, is like, what are the ways that you have found forgiveness for yourself in moments where the previous thought was like, I can save him or we can save him, and then getting to that point in the aftermath of not only if that's the terms, like we didn't save him, but then coming to the acceptance of like maybe he saved me. I think that's so beautiful when you said that. But I think for people listening and for myself personally, like having lost somebody that I felt like there was things I probably could have done, you know, how do you reconcile that or find forgiveness for yourself?
It's like such a good question because like I've thought about it so many times, you know. And in the beginning, I think in the very beginning, like I did carry such a huge amount of guilt because like I'm like the oldest and I'm like the sister and I was like such a caretaker like by nature and especially with my brothers and but I also it felt like every time that thought would come into my mind in the beginning before I was ready to really sit with it, um, the thought would come into my mind like, I had so much work to do. I had this like buzzing inside of me that I had never felt before, like that I needed to like just go. And I look back at that with like two different thought processes. Like, yes, I know I was running. I wasn't ready to sit with those like uncomfortable like feelings and realizations. But I think in that moment, if I would have sat with them, I would have ended up in a hole as well, you know? So like, I think that propelled me forward a little bit. And like, I could just feel Robert's energy so close. Like that was that buzzing. Like that was him, you know, he was just like, and, so I think that kept me distracted in a positive way in the beginning. But then there came a time where I really had to start facing some of that. And about 18 months after losing Robert, we had really built a pretty good foundation with Connection is the Cure. We'd had a second event in like Mesa, Arizona. We were doing stuff in our community. We were planning more events. We were, you know, really getting some just processes underway. We got our 501 filing. Like there was all these really exciting things, but I really distinctly remember that fall just being like feeling this like burnout that I'd never felt before, but I didn't recognize it as that, you know? And we were gearing up that January for another big event at the Idaho Center. And I just came to this like huge realization that I needed to just like breathe for a second, because I'd always looked at Robert and been like, "Call, it's so crazy that we're siblings and we're so different from each other. Like he's always been like this and I'm like this." And all of a sudden, like in that 18-month period, as I really got to know him better on a different level, because I think he was with me so often, it was almost like, you know, words weren't exchanged, but it was almost like I just was more connected with him now, or like in that time period, than I was when he was alive, you know, especially towards the end. And I started to realize really how similar we were and how some of the things that were his greatest detriments were really rising to the surface, because I think we all have this capacity to function, you know? And as that capacity, you know, our capacity is not growing because we're not working on like self-growth, but like all the experiences in our life that are happening are putting us over that capacity, and we can't like shove it down anymore. And it's like coming out everywhere, you know? And a huge part of that was the guilt that I was carrying. And I didn't know that at the time, but a huge part of that was the guilt, because that was my job and I failed. And I think as I started to try to accept that, and accept a handful of other things, I didn't have the capacity. And so like it just started to blow up. And then the guilt set in of like, for the last 18 months, I've been preaching about connection and how we're supposed to be like reaching out and helping and not being ashamed to get help and talk. And I was not doing that, because I had always been the one that I was supposed to carry everything. And I was like the one that kept things together. And I was, all of these things. And I just realized um, how much I started to realize, I guess, how much I had felt that taking care of myself or addressing myself was selfish. And I needed to put everyone else in front of that. And as long as I did that, I would be okay. And I wasn't okay. So I think that was really the beginning of my own personal journey. And one of the first things I had to do was work through the guilt of feeling like I had failed, because I felt like a failure in general. And this was just one huge thing that I had failed at. And so that really was like that 18-month point after losing him really was where his journey kind of melded into my journey,
Yeah. I think you explained that beautifully with the capacity and just different supports we have in place, different coping strategies, all these different things kind of come together. But I heard the analogy at one point that people that get to that point of taking their life, it's like first you're in a sauna and there's a door or maybe a window or some way out, but eventually you're in a sauna, you're in this like heat chamber and there's no door, and you eventually will do anything. You will do crazy things. You will betray your family or steal or lie or get in trouble with the law because you're trying so hard to get out of this space that maybe you built yourself and you forgot to build a door. Like sometimes it is our own choices that kind of get us to those places, but you're familiar with an experience that I had after Robert's passing that actually just gave me so much compassion for him, because I remember saying to John, your youngest brother, if this is the way that he felt all the time, I don't blame him. And I think that we often spend a lot of time, understandably, the stages of grief, we're just angry at them. We're like, how could you do this to me? But I think that in that short span after he passed away, I was actually given the gift of perspective of even like a tiny, tiny taste of maybe being 10 minutes in the sauna with no door and being like, I wouldn't be able to do this for much longer. And I can't believe how long he did that. And I think that for me, it just gave me so much compassion and like not a full understanding, of course, which I'm thankful for. I don't want the full understanding of what that feels like, but a glimpse to maybe find forgiveness or a little bit of understanding when people get pushed to that point. And I guess for you, kind of when that journey melded, what were some of the things that you did to not dig the hole deeper, but kind of start maybe clawing your way or crawling your way out of it?
I think I really was lost. Like I have so much perspective now, so I'm trying to think back to like those moments, but I really thought that I knew a lot and that I was really introspective and that I was really intuitive and that I possessed all these qualities like my awareness. And I do believe that, those things are true, but I don't think I even really knew what to do at the time. Like I kind of just started like turning to the things that I was trying to help other people do, So that was really helpful. And one of those things was, I started seeing a counselor and I started seeing a psychiatrist and I did EMDR therapy, which was like super helpful. Yeah. I've been like a runner most of my adult life, and just that concept, I really understood that EMDR, And then when I was able to see the psychiatrist, like I thought, so there's some major things that I've always struggled with in my life, and that's like my confidence, my abilities. I have some like things that are hard about myself that I just thought were kind of like character defects. Like, and I know everyone has like different viewpoints on this, and this is just my viewpoint. But when I was able to go in and visit with the psychiatrist that I ended up completely trusting with everything. And it was just the connection that was there right off the bat was like so amazing, because I know that a lot of times you have to really like try different people and try different, like, but it was just like a fit from the very beginning. And spending 90 minutes with her and just kind of going through everything and her being able to ask the right questions. And it came to the surface that like I was diagnosed with an attention deficit. And as I started just talking with her and then researching a little bit, like I didn't dive like way into Google because there's like so much, I didn't want to be overwhelmed, but just learning so much about how like attention disorders are really until, the last, I won't say handful of years, but the last couple decades, they weren't studied in women. And like, you just think of that as like little hyper boys in class, that can't sit still. And as I started learning more about it, it was like all these things that I thought were like character defects within myself actually were signs and symptoms of an attention disorder. And it didn't make me like blame that, but it gave me hope that like this actually isn't part of like my personality or my character, but it's developed more into that because that's like the story I've told myself. So I think that being able to just, for me, have a diagnosis and be able to know that I had power over it to improve, and it wasn't just like, oh, this is just the way I am, gave me so much hope. And I think that's really where like I started moving forward. And it was like so slow. Like before I said like one step in front of the other, like this was like army crawling to like my knees to, and now looking back on this last handful of years, like, man, like there's so much that I've learned that now I'm able to like help my children with. But it is so uncomfortable. We just had like a speaker come last week for Connection is the Cure, and his big thing is do the work. And he has like the whole crowd, like he's like, say do the work. And everyone's like, do the work. There is so much work to be done. And I think that I've always been overwhelmed by that because I didn't want to try to do it and fail and be failing at another thing. And my mindset has shifted so much to realizing like I don't have to be perfect. I'm not responsible for everyone and their reactions and their emotions. And like just so many things that I feel like I've been able to learn that has allowed me, it's not selfish, that has allowed me to do that work. And I remember John, my youngest brother, that so I remember shortly after Robert died, he sent me a song, and it was a song that is like a collaboration of Gavin DeGraw, which was one of Robert's very favorite artists, and Need to Breathe. And it's called Brother. And there's a line in that song that says, face down in the desert, I've got a cage locked around my heart. I've dropped the keys where my failures are. Now my hands can't reach that far. And I felt really strongly that like probably everyone that we come into contact with has felt that way at one time or another in their life, where something has happened or they've made a mistake or they've fallen short of a goal or something that's put them in a really dark place where they feel like they can't come back. Like that's their identity now. And I think before I really started to move forward on like getting some help, like I felt that way too. And I think I see that Robert felt that way. Like he became his mistakes and then it just escalated. But that is like ultimately the biggest lesson that I feel like I've learned from this is like, you're never too far gone. Your mistakes are never, something that you can't reach out and ask for help and get help. And I know that it doesn't always turn out, like things don't always turn out the way that we like hope for. And like you said, like some of those things are like because of our own choices, and there's like natural consequences of all that. But I just feel like the higher power that I believe in has a way of taking whatever it is we've done and making it into something else, and something else that we can feel hope from, like a new starting point. Yeah. And that is really like, because I even feel like during those times that I was really struggling, my judgment was so clouded on things, and I started to believe things about myself that were just not true, you know, and my power was just being like taken away a little at a time. Parts of me inside were dying, you know. And I think taking those first initial steps, getting some help, and then being willing to do that work, like even when you're like relationships are suffering because you're changing and evolving, and even when there's things that you've like solidly believed your whole life are like evolving, and you're like, I don't think this is the way this is anymore. I got to reevaluate this, and being willing to like take parts of your old life and take them with you, but then also learn new parts, and being open. And there's so much that when you've worked your whole life to please everyone, to make everyone happy, to be perfect, it's terrifying. And you just feel like you're disappointing everyone. And you're like, are you sure this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Sometimes being in that bubble is bliss, because like we don't know there's a world that exists outside of it. And I think I've been able to witness so much growth within you personally, and with your community and your cause and all of these things. And I always try to remind myself, like, I'm allowed to change my mind. I don't have to. It's a beautiful thing to be able to change our mind, and it's part of the human experience, and being able to be curious about things or question things. And before we started recording, you said, you know, when you know better, you can do better. And I'd love for you to speak on that a little bit too, just how instead of going down the rabbit holes of like, I wish I would have known what I know now, or how I wish I could go back, like there's such an invitation for that when we have more information. It's almost, especially as women, I think our first thought to be like, oh, if I would have just known this back then, you know. But how do you instead keep your eyes toward the future and keep moving forward and putting, maybe you're army crawling, maybe you're running, but like moving forward rather than being invited backward?
It's a really good question, because like I'll preface it with like, you know, like we are human. And so that thought, I'm not going to say like, oh, I just had this moment and that thought has never come into my head again. But I think that thought does pop into my head, but the more I'm able to, okay, so going back just a little bit, like in the last handful of months, I've been part of this amazing program that has probably helped me grow more in the last 3 months than in the last 10 years. You know, it's just been amazing. And one of the things that I've learned is that like the stories we tell ourselves, you know, so when that thought pops into my mind, like, oh, like, why didn't you do this sooner? Why didn't you know this? Or why didn't, you know, and then you start to go backward, having that ability to be reflective. And like we talk a lot about this like book of evidence. So it's like we have these stories that we tell ourselves that are mostly not true. And, you know, there's all different reasons. Like our brain does it to protect us. Like we have an insecurity, or we haven't like dove into something that we need to deal with. And we have this immediate reaction to ourselves, like, you know, and it's usually not very nice. We're not speaking very nicely to ourselves. But when they talk about this book of evidence, so we're filling in the blanks because we don't have all the answers. And then over here, we have this book of evidence that's like, this is your track record. These are the things that actually show. So like having that muscle memory to, instead of be like, you turn over here, to be able to turn to that book of evidence and be like, I think that concept of like, when you know better, you do better has been like a total mantra for me. Because I feel like now I'm constantly adding to that book of evidence, and I'm adding to that book. And there were a lot of things that I look at that I could have done to help Robert, but that's not the way it was supposed to be, right. And one of the things that I do a lot with Connection is the Cure personally is I speak with families and individuals that are struggling, or families that have lost loved ones to suicide or overdose. And every time I have a conversation with someone like that, I'm just reminded of how much I've learned. And I think in the beginning I would hang up and be like, oh, this is never enough. I can never give enough encouragement. I can never listen long enough. I can never give the right resources or the right answers, because it's such an individualized thing. And I would get down and just be like, oh, this just sucked so much energy out of me. And, but I get off of those calls now and I'm like, if I can give someone one thing that they didn't have before, like it sounds so cheesy, but I feel like I've done enough, And so yes, all this that I've learned, I don't get to go back and apply it to Robert, but there's this peace and comfort knowing that I get to keep applying it. I didn't get to apply it in that one time, but I get to apply it in the hundreds of times that have happened. And I've gotten to apply it to my own kids and just so many people that I love, and the gratitude that I receive from them and the gratitude that I have for them in those moments and those conversations, it outweighs any regret. Not that it doesn't sneak back in, but when I'm able to really look at it through a different lens, I'm like, this is by far better than anything I could have hoped for. And I think that's what I kind of meant. I feel like the God that I believe in has a way of making it better than you ever, there's this loss, but he makes it better than you can imagine. And I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah. I love that book of evidence example for myself when I get invited down those rabbit holes, or the thought will pop into my mind, even you could have done this because you have this information now. I think that the two questions I ask myself are, one, who told me that? And a lot of the times we think that, okay, if I had all this information now, I actually could have changed the past. There's no saying that even if you had all the information you have right now, any outcome would have been different. In fact, you did everything you possibly could. And if you're listening and you're in this place where you're, regretful, or you feel like I could have done this or I could have done that, there's no way of knowing that having that information would have even made a difference. And then the same situation would have played out and you would have learned more things moving forward and been in this position of thinking, well, now if I could go back, and really it's that cycle is just not serving of us. But so who told me that? And then the second question is, who benefits from me thinking this? And if the answer is no one, especially not myself, if I'm just saying I'm bad, I'm a failure, I did this thing wrong, no one in the world benefits from that thought. And so I feel learning to start slowly having our habit be going to that book of evidence, going through the things we know to be true. If you in that moment can't think of something good about yourself, call someone that can, and seek somebody that loves you and that sees you, and be willing to say I'm just having a tough moment. I'm really struggling with my own worth, or recognizing that there wasn't something that I could have done differently. Call on those supporters. And I think that often we start to create that as our new habit, where when those thoughts try to creep in, or when those rabbit holes invite us down them, instead it's I'm going to change the channel. That's not helpful. No one in my life, especially myself, benefits from this thought pattern. And again, there is no way to play out the past and change it. We just kind of are where we are. And so I love those perspectives that you gave. And I think that, as you also said, it's just so important to also remind ourselves and everyone that it never ends, where suddenly you're just at this place where you do have it figured out. You never have a limiting belief. You never have doubt. A lot of times those are just invitations to get to know ourselves deeper, to move forward beyond that in a different way. And I think that we often maybe see things from the outside as like, oh, wow, here's this woman and she lost her brother and now she's just built this empire where she goes around helping everyone all the time and like they all live happily ever after. And being willing to share that there are still days that you probably struggle getting out of bed, or you have those moments of being like, man, I'm really feeling this low right now, is that human connection. It's like what allows us to be able to be seen. And then in being brave enough to do that, somebody in the room might be like, oh my gosh, you feel like that way too? Like I thought that I had to just flip that script and never have a bad day again. But I feel like in your purpose of connection is the cure, it's more frequently than not in those moments of humanity, of being able to say, like, I have figured so much out, and every time I figure something out, I realize I still have so much to learn.
Totally. Yeah. Yes. And not being overwhelmed by that.
Yeah.
Because there is so much.
Yes. And exactly as you said, like, it can feel so overwhelming to do the work. And it's like, but where do I start and where do I begin and how do I do all of the work? But I always say, how do you change the world one person at a time? And that starts with yourself. It can't be, I'm going to just change a million people's lives overnight. And sometimes focusing on ourselves is the scariest, hardest one to change. And so it's really easy to pour into everyone else and deflect and distract. But I think that sometimes doing the work is just being brave enough to take that first step. It's not going to happen overnight, but being willing to maybe do the one thing that's going to get us a little bit closer and realize that that is all we can do and all we can ask of ourselves. And it's not this gigantic mountain that we're expected to just climb, with the snap of our fingers.
Yes, completely. And I think too, like I mentioned at the beginning, like I felt like I spent a lifetime preparing for, some of the stuff that we've been able to do with Connection is the Cure, because I have felt like a connector, like with other people. But that's kind of like the connection that I thought of, but through all of this, I have learned to be a connector to myself, because that was an area that I wasn't going to tread.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time. And I think with that, I think that we have, I hate to like dog on the world, but like we have so many distractions.
Yeah.
And those distractions, like I think numb our intuition. And especially as women, we've been gifted this like amazing intuition to have an awareness, and that awareness can feel heavy depending on how you feel it. And I think that leaning into that, even though it's like hard and scary, because through all of this, I've learned that like I am an empath. I do like, there's just so much that I've learned. But on days where it feels heavy, like I don't want to carry anyone else's energy. I don't want to carry their heartache and their sorrow. And, like I'm already in a low and I'm already like, all of that. And, but then realizing that when you do the work on yourself, like you realize you don't have to carry it. Like you can like hold space for it because you're with them, or you're listening, or you're thinking about them. But it's different than like actually shouldering it. And I don't know how to like explain that. It's just like a shift that happens, I think, when you are willing to do the work, even though I know I have so much more to do. But it allows me, I feel like, to use that intuition to be able to be with someone and maybe feel like if they are struggling, or if I've noticed a shift, or if they're, so like, I think that I would encourage people to like tune in and use your intuition and learn how to sense or know that, when someone is struggling, and be willing to like ask. Yeah. Because like, I think sometimes you're like, oh, I know this person is struggling and I don't want to ask because I don't have the answers, or I can't carry it, or I am nervous. Like there's so many different things I think that we can take advantage of learning you know, that have to do with like suicide and addiction and all of mental health, but really just have to do with humanity. And I think there's like a handful of things to learn that are super empowering. So instead of like shying away from those conversations, we're willing to have them, because I know, like, I do think it's important if you're struggling to ask for help. But if you've ever struggled before, you also know how hard it is to ask for help. So I think it's like participants on both sides. Like, if we are struggling, we need to learn to ask for help. And if we are not the ones struggling, we need to reach in and ask how we can help. And I think it's definitely just like everything else, that two-way street. And until you can build that connection with yourself, and so much of that connection for me with myself has to do with my spirituality, and like, not just as it relates to like religion or anything else, like, but your actual spirituality, like your connection with your creator, you know, and how when that line is cleared, I think it opens up so much ability for you to be able to work on yourself, because you know you're not doing it alone. There's something greater than you that's there helping you. And when you can do that, I think that you have that more of that capacity to reach in, you know, and meet people where they're at. And I just try sometimes not to, like, going back to that, when we know better, we do better. But, you know, I had like my blinders on and I was like, you know, heading forward. And not that that's a bad thing, because it is overwhelming. But like, once you see things that you can't unsee, you've got to figure out how to, like you said earlier, get curious and figure out, you know, like, I feel like I used to like more bully myself, like, oh, look what you did again, you know, but now it's like, wait, why am I still getting defensive about this? Why is this still coming up? Like, why can't I show up like as my authentic self in this moment? Because I am too blinded by like resentment or whatever the emotion is, you know? And like being able to reach in and be like, curious, where is this coming from? Like,
so powerful.
So it's been awesome to learn those things through people that are much wiser than I am, and, you know, willing to be there to help.
And I love that you said some of the clarity that comes when you realize you don't have to do it alone, because what happens with that as well is exactly what happened that very first night you went to sleep without Robert maybe being here physically on this world, in that sentiment that popped so effortless into your head, which is like, I've got him and you've got work to do. It doesn't only mean we don't have to do things alone when we have that clear spiritual line. It means that we're not responsible then for like carrying all of there isn't even a loss. Like, he wasn't lost. He's found now in a whole new place. And I'm such a spiritual person and I love like signs and different things like that. I think that it can just be a really positive, like, energetic frequency and wavelength to share. And so I'd love if you have a few that pop into your mind of like ways in which you've still felt Robert, or like his energy or his presence has shown up and, you know, just surprised you.
Yes. For the first, like, I would say like that first year, I feel like almost every single time, like I explained that buzzing feeling that I had, that faded over time, because I feel like he was like approving that I was like on the right road. But I feel like for that first year, almost every time I would get into my car by myself, I could feel him so strongly sitting in the passenger seat. And I would be driving, not always in silence. Sometimes I would have music on, but I would just feel like these thought processes would just start. And it was like something I was trying to work through personally, or like a step forward we were trying to make with Connection is the Cure, or something that I was battling with one of my kids, you know, wondering how to help them. I just feel like having him there, like, it was like our brains were connected, and I was just gathering all this information, and there was such a flow, you know. And I remember probably about after the first year, I got into my car one day and my heart was extra heavy, and I feel like I don't even remember what they were now, but I feel like I was being faced with like different challenges and just feeling really overwhelmed. And I remember not feeling that, not feeling him there. And I started kind of like, wait, I don't really remember the last time I felt him there, you know? And I just immediately went to anger. I was like, where are you? Like, why aren't you showing up for me? Like, did you abandon me again? Like, I can't believe you. I should have known you were going to do this. I mean, just like so much. And the angrier I got, like letting that out, I actually started to feel a little bit better saying some of the things that I was saying that I was too ashamed to say in front of anyone. And Robert had the best sense of humor. And he always had a nickname for everyone. And he would make up funny lyrics to songs and sing them to the kids. And he had this laugh, and I like think of it now as like, if you remember the Muppets, when they would throw their heads back and their whole mouth would like open. And he had this really broad, toothy smile, these big lips, and I just perfectly envisioned him throwing his head back, and he would make this like ha noise when he would do it. And he was like, I took the training wheels off. Like, you had your training wheels on, and that was me. And it's time to take your training wheels off. Like, I'm still here. I'm still going to help you. I'm still going to show up. But I've got this huge thing that I'm working on over here, and I've got to get to work too, you know? And through that thought process, like, I started thinking about all the people that were in a similar situation to him that have passed on too, from like all of these things that we struggle with. And I just pictured this like big army, you know, working with him, because I'd always pictured him working, but like all the people that were with him. And I was like, in that moment, I'm like, yeah, you did take the training wheels off. I'm not ready. But then it was like, yeah, I am, you know? And so I think I would feel him still from time to time, but that was like I didn't feel him like I did. And at the time, I did feel a little abandoned, but I look back at that now at being like, you never feel ready to take stuff on like that. And where I knew I wasn't alone, like I still kept wanting his help, but like I also knew it was time. And I think the other thing, so we grew up in a house that was like, my parents were like super in tune with nature. I guess like in their day and age, like when they were younger, they were like, would have been considered like hippies, you know. We like lived in a teepee for a little while when we were growing up, and they always just really by example taught us to lean into that like spiritual, intuitive side, the giving, the non-judgmental, the unconditional love. I think that they were like the best examples of that. And part of that was just this love for nature, like this love and appreciation for like all of God's creation. Like he must have loved us so much that he gave us so many beautiful things to enjoy. And that is really where I feel Robert like the closest, and like being able to be in a place and think like, oh, he would have loved this, you know? And I think when that like opened up, it was like, I just started seeing and feeling him everywhere. It didn't have to be in the passenger seat of my car, you know? So I'd say those are probably like the two biggest.
I love that. And as you said, like really creating space and time for that intuition, for that energy to be there, knowing that in any moment that you need to, even though the training wheels are off, you can pause the bike and sit in silence or in reverence or in nature and know you can access that energy. And that's such a gift. It's hard when those like daily little meetings go away, but what a cool experience to have such a deep knowledge and understanding of even the bike analogy and like him saying I've got work to do. Like all of that is such an incredible knowing to have with you. And in those moments where maybe his energy isn't as accessible, it's like, man, he must be busy. Like, cause I know he would be here, you know, trying to kick my feet out from underneath me or trip me or do something like pull a prank on me if he could, but he must be so busy right now. And those types of reminders can be so peace instilling in those times where it feels like we're left alone. You know, it's such a reminder that we're not. And then that also a lot of our work to do is in those quiet moments when we do feel alone. And that's when so much of the inspiration and kind of deep knowing has a chance to come in and find us.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. What would you say that your personal version of red nail energy is?
My personal version?
Yes, the thing that just makes you feel like you can take up space or have a seat at any table.
Yeah. Okay, let me think. I have always had a really hard time accepting like attention or compliments or like praise for anything that I do, like because I never want to. I have a fear of like coming across like arrogant or like full of myself, and that has been like a limiting belief, I think, because I think the more you can embrace the things that you're good at while simultaneously working on the things that maybe you're not so good at. And then there's things that you're just never going to be good at. Right. And you just need to find someone to help you, you know, yes. Like you're like, okay, that's not a strength yes. and that's totally okay. Mm-hmm. But I think this process of, I don't like to call it change because I think it's more like of becoming
and transformation.
Yes.
Becoming.
And returning because mm-hmm. you're really returning, you know, all along the way we collect all this stuff mm-hmm. and that does limit us. Mm-hmm. And then when we're able to do the work mm-hmm. and shed some of that and continue to shed it because of work we're doing, we're able to accept like our strengths mm-hmm. and like our and our weaknesses, yeah. you know? Yeah. And so I think that like I'm learning, and I still can't even like totally say it, but I think I'm learning to accept that like I have a lot of abilities and I have a lot of love mm-hmm. and I have a lot of grace and I have a lot to give and a lot to offer. Mm-hmm. And as I'm doing that, I need to continue to learn to offer it to myself and accept it, you know, like the way other people can accept it. So it's like, I feel like I've built this confidence where I do feel like I could sit down and have a conversation with anyone and walk away feeling like I left them with something that made them better mm-hmm. than, you know, if they choose to like yeah. see it and accept yeah. it, like, and then that I can also mm-hmm. like gain something from them. So like, I think it would be that heart exchange. Yeah. Like when you sit down with people and have conversation that's more than just about the weather. Yeah. Yeah. There's this heart exchange that happens mm-hmm. and where you feel like you're giving away a little part of your energy, like you're also receiving when you're like open to it because you love yourself. Yeah. So I think that my energy would be that like I'm accepting like that I'm pretty awesome.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And what an amazing place to build from then. If everyone was able to walk around the world being so confident and comfortable with your strengths and weaknesses. Like you said, it's arrogance is maybe like I'm awesome in every single way and every single thing. And it's a distraction and a deterrent from the things that maybe are your weaknesses. But what a beautiful place to be able to connect with other people from is like, I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses, I love myself, I accept myself. And so now I have such an open heart that can do the same for others. It's a really beautiful quality.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for anyone listening that would like to connect with you, follow Connection is the Cure, I'll make sure to link it in the show notes. But what are the best ways to do that?
So we're working on building our social media presence, which is always like challenging when you're 40 something years old. But Instagram is really awesome way to connect with us. Our website is another really good way. There's like a spot that you can like put in and get connected with us. And those are probably like the best ways. But yeah, reach out. Like we have ways for people to get involved. We have opportunities for businesses to get involved and be represented in like the events that we do. There's just a lot of different things that you can do to get on board. Yeah. Or if you're needing help, reach out to and we can help there as well.
Amazing. And then any last kind of words, thoughts, inspiration that you would like to leave listeners with before we close?
Yes, there is something. Okay, so when I started learning about suicide and addiction, and I started learning about messaging around these topics, I wanted to do everything right because I wasn't trying to make the problem worse. I was trying to make it better, And so through so much research that they've done, and I mean, just so much that they've learned about people that have survived suicide attempts and putting the time and effort into that research, I do believe that there's like good messaging and messaging that can cause more harm. And it's not exactly what you would think. And there's a lot around it, but there's an overarching guideline or rule that comes with suicide messaging where, and especially with like youth and stuff, that you don't want to like glorify the person that has died by suicide, because, it may encourage other people to seek that same attention, even though they're not like actually physically here to like receive it. And in a lot of people that I've talked to that have lost loved ones to suicide, that's really hard because then it also like I wanted to be a rule follower. Like I am a rule follower, like not so much anymore. I mean, I don't know, but like I just wanted to do it right, I guess, like not necessarily following the rules, but I just wanted to do it right in a productive way. And I realized that really made it so I couldn't really talk about Robert the way I wanted to talk about him. And I couldn't I think we do have a way of like remembering all the good and kind of putting aside the bad, And so where if you're out there listening and you have lost a loved one to suicide and you're feeling like, maybe you haven't found the right way to like memorialize them or be able to talk about them, or if you're out there listening to this and you know someone that has lost someone lost someone to suicide or overdose or something, like, and you think it's like a little uncomfortable to ask about their person, like I feel like, or you're worried that you're going to bring it up and then it's going to like be a struggle for them. Like they're already thinking about their person,
right?
So like, don't be afraid. And like, kind of, of course, fill out the situation and like, you can't just go into it with assumptions, I guess, that they're, where they're at. But like, I have found ways now that I feel like I can like, celebrate Robert and talk about him and like not worry that I'm doing the messaging wrong because it feels right with me. And there are some really cool organizations as well as Connection is the Cure in our valley that are doing things to help people and being able to honor their loved ones. And so if you'd like to know more about those too, like reach out to, because we have met so many amazing people. But I think that just understanding that it's like like all of these things are so individualized, but don't be afraid to like talk about it. Because like I love it when people ask me about Robert, like, because there's this fear when you lose someone in any way, I remember when I started to forget, like, enough time had passed. I mean, it's going to be 4 years in May. I started to forget, like, what he smelled like, or what he sounded like, or like how his hands looked, or his mannerisms. And the only way to remember those things is to talk about them and to kind of like reminisce. So when people ask you about your loved one, it's a way for them to continue to remember. And then I see, like, I have a son that's almost 20 and then one that's just turned 17. And just in the last couple years since Robert has been gone, he's had this huge growth spurt and really turned into like a man, you know? And like, I look at him now and like, genetics are such a funny thing because like he has Robert's exact hands and his exact lips and like things that help me like remember. So I think it's so good to help people remember the things that they loved about their person that's gone.
Yeah, I love that reminder, and to know that there's a way to not glorify maybe the act in which they died, but to also still create space to celebrate and support the person they were, and that you're never doing something wrong by asking someone about their loved one or asking them about the person they lost, and that it's not a matter of doing it right or wrong or anything like that. And of course, there are semantics we can get into when it comes to maybe the general messaging put out there for some of these organizations and for some of the events you put on. Like, the event is about something different than focusing on these specific people that we've lost, but there's still so much room and opportunity in our life to focus and celebrate them. So I think that's a really good reminder, and I appreciate that message, and it's a unique one that I haven't really thought about a lot. So I think it's a really important one to share. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, and I just feel like we could keep talking forever, but I have loved this so much, and just, love you so much, and feel really thankful for all of the gifts that Robert has continued to give everyone that was in his life way long after he's left, which I think just speaks to him as well. And if you're listening and you're struggling, as September said, please don't be afraid to reach out. I always want to be an open door. I know she is an open door. There are so many resources on her website. And as we said at the beginning of the episode, you just never have to navigate anything alone. So don't feel like you have to be so tough and so strong that you have to carry it all by yourself, because there is strength in numbers. And yeah, we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks, September.
Thank you. Thank you. One other thing that maybe like we could add, and I just thought of this, was just like utilizing 988.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Because like you don't have to like be suicidal to call 988.
Okay.
Like if you're carrying something, like if someone told you a secret and like you don't want to carry it alone anymore, but you can't tell anyone else.
Okay.
Or like if you were sitting with someone that was like, you ask the question like, are you thinking of killing yourself?
Okay.
And they're like, yeah. And then you're like, oh crap, what am I supposed to do now?
Okay.
You could call for them.
Okay.
While you're sitting with that person, put it on speakerphone. You guys can all have a conversation.
Okay. Maybe just be like, and one more resource, and say all that. I'll add it in there when you were talking about that.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll just go right now. Okay. One more resource I was going to just put in a plug for that's super important is the suicide hotline used to be like a big long number, and they've changed it to a 3-digit dialing code in the last handful of years, like 911. Okay. So for a mental health crisis, it's 988. And depending on your area code on your phone, they'll get you in contact with local resources for that area code. So a lot of people think that like, oh, I have to be suicidal to call 988, or I have to be like in dire need. And you don't. Like 988 is for anyone that is struggling in any way, needs to confide in someone, needs a sounding board. There's a trained operator on the other side of that line. And I think another thing that's really important to know is that like if you are with someone and you've like tapped into that intuition, something's not okay, you've asked the direct question, they answer with a yes, and you're like, oh no, what do I do now? Like,
you can dial 988 and be on speakerphone with that person that you're with you, with that operator, and they can get you connected with immediate resources, or really just help you in any next step that you need to take, depending on what you're struggling with. So 988 is a huge resource, needs to be utilized more. People need to know it's out there. And just really, if you're just having a hard day, just use it. Don't ever hesitate, to call and get some help there.
Incredible. Yeah, thank you. I will make sure, again, link that in the show notes, but 988 for anyone listening, and what an amazing needed resource. And don't ever feel like something is too small or not the right fit. If you call, they will get you in touch with the next steps or help you navigate that, so you don't have to navigate it alone.
Yeah. Perfect. That's like,
Yeah, I want to make sure we can unplug it.
yeah, because I just saw a thing that was like,